I'm your host, Anayet Chowdhury, and today we have the pleasure of speaking with Summer Sanders.
And the students
Right.
showed up and they were like, "Who are you and why do we need to trust you?" And I was like,
Okay.
"Well, how about we don't say that kid is a bully, but we say these are bullying behaviors." And
Mhm.
I realized that they needed a common language. Instead of labeling students as bullies, instead of pointing the finger at a student and saying, "What are we going to do about that kid?" I was like, how can we approach this as a microcosm and using counseling techniques to approach the whole school culture? What we did is really activate that student voice and choice.
There are so many factors of teachers being burnt out.
We also have fun. I think that that's also a really important part.
Yeah.
Right? It doesn't need to be so serious. Like, let's have
Right.
some fun. Learning should be
Right.
fun. We're all here on purpose with a purpose.
The Avenue of the Strongest is a podcast dedicated to exploring the lives and experiences of the most inspiring individuals from around the world. Each episode features interviews with fascinating guests who share their insights and wisdom on a variety of topics, including education, impact, motivation, health, and learning. Here are your hosts, Anayet Chowdhury and Vlad Suleyman.
I'm your host, Anayet Chowdhury, and today we have the pleasure of speaking with Summer Sanders. Miss Sanders is the director and head of school at IVA High, a mission-driven high school that focuses on deep understanding and preparing each student for the ever-changing 21st century. Before joining IVA High, she served as a K-8 counselor and middle school administrator at an arts-integrated, project-based school in San Francisco for 6 years, and has 20 years of experience as a school leader, therapist, clinical supervisor, school counselor, educator, and community organizer. We're thrilled to have her here to share her insights and experiences with us. Ms. Sanders, welcome.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Yeah, I'd love to take you back to 2015 when you joined the founding team as the Director of Community Engagement Admissions at IVA. Can you tell us a little bit more about your journey to becoming an educator and then how you eventually got involved with IVA High? This podcast is sponsored by ArgoPrep, an award-winning educational publisher serving over 1 million students nationwide. If you're a kindergarten to 8th grade teacher or principal, be sure to check out our supplementary workbooks to get your students ready for standardized state testing. We cover all subjects from kindergarten to 8th grade. Use the coupon code AVENUE for a 25% discount off of all purchase orders. Visit us today at argoprep.com/store.
Of course. So my background is actually my first job was looking into counseling. I went to school. My undergrad was in human services with a minor in mental health and child adolescent studies. And through that process, I started working in schools and working with students, and really got into helping to support them alongside in an education setting, and partnering with the teacher and other constituents in an education setting. And then through that, I actually went and got my master's degree and in counseling and focusing on mental health therapy. So as I was journeying through my journey to become a licensed marriage and family therapist, I again started working in schools, and I knew I always wanted to be in education. My mom was a teacher, my uncle was a teacher, my aunt was a
Okay.
teacher, surrounded
Yeah.
by teachers, but I didn't want to like spend my nights grading papers. But I was
Okay.
really passionate about the education system and know how it really transformed my life and the lives of my friends. So through that process, I really started working with underserved populations and students that were into gangs and had a history of gang life. And I ended up working at an alternative high school. And so through that process, I started doing a lot more group counseling and pushing into the classrooms and sort of seeing a disconnect between the relationships that I was having with students in these group counseling sessions, where the relationships were very authentic and real and honest, and then going into the classroom setting, they would just shut off and
Mhm.
just sort of like close off literally with their bodies. And and just sort of like, I don't want to do this. I don't want to be here. And so I got really fascinated in how can we bridge those relationships into the classroom setting and
Mm.
using those therapeutic and counseling techniques to help and support teachers to really reach the students and finding those things that they're passionate about. Because I would have these really in-depth conversations what they're passionate about in the counseling room. And then as soon as
Right.
they go into the classroom, they were like, I don't, why am I here? I don't need to do this. Right.
Right.
And so I had the opportunity to move to San Francisco and got hired as a K through 8 counselor. So now transitioning from middle school, high school to the lower grades. Um, and I was hired there because they were having a bullying problem. And they were saying like, oh, we have all these school bullies. And so just, as an observer, that's sort of how I approach a new culture is observing, asking questions. And
Hmm.
I realized that they needed a common language instead of labeling students as bullies, instead of, like pointing the finger at a student and saying, what are we going to do about that kid? I was like, how can we approach this again as a microcosm and using counseling techniques to approach the whole school culture. So, giving them language, helping them build those relationships, and empowering students to be models of what it's like to be an ally, making an ally
Hmm.
be cool.
Right.
And
Right.
so, and I learned project-based learning there. I learned arts integration and being able to work side by side with the teachers in that setting. They were much more welcoming of me in the classroom, and we partnered and really transformed the school culture.
Mm.
And then the school became a safe, welcoming place. I then had the opportunity, was invited to become a founding director of IVA High School. And all we had was a name. We didn't have a logo. We didn't have a building. We didn't have teachers. We met in different coffee shops and just envisioned what we would like as a school. And so taking all
Right.
that previous knowledge of being a high school counselor, a college counselor, all that other stuff that I did, and saying, what is the school that we want for our students? And so first starting with that culture is what we really based it on, and modeling after these intellectual virtue education.
Well, I actually want to ask you something, which I
Yeah,
caught
sure.
on when you were talking about. Um, so the school that you were working that had a bully problem. Were the teachers welcoming at first, with your relationship between the teachers and students, or was it like, Miss Sanders, what are you doing here? I'm the teacher here. I kind of want to know that
Mhm.
dynamic. I know, maybe a couple of weeks or months in, it's a fantastic relationship, but what were those like early days like?
Yeah, so I think that they needed to know and trust me and to understand, what my approach was, and me also understanding and trusting them and what their approach was and learning from them. Like sometimes I would just sit in those kindergarten classrooms and just absorb the way that the teachers were talking to the students because I was
Right.
used to talking to high school kids and,
Right.
moving from like, hey, y'all, come over here to like, hi, friends, and just the way that you talk to a 5-year-old versus a 15 or 18-year-old.
Yeah.
And so it was a partnership. We were learning from each other. And they had what's called responsive classroom already in place for the most part. And so I became trained in that. And so we already started becoming partners in that process and having a common shared language and vision. And I understood the process that they were doing in the classroom. And then I was able to deepen and make the process more thorough from a therapeutic point of view. The teachers overall were very welcoming.
Okay.
It took the parents actually some time to get on
Mhm.
board.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. The parents actually didn't even want me to use the word bully. And I was like,
Okay.
well, how about we don't say that kid is a bully, but we say these are bullying behaviors, and having
Mm.
students be able to identify that those are choices and not a label of a person. So that was
Mm.
a big shift for the parent community to be able to get on board with that. And so, yeah.
And I want to quickly clarify for our listeners over here, responsive classroom, that's a can you clarify on that? That touches a lot on the SEL component, right? Social emotional learning.
Yes, Responsive Classroom, I'm a huge fan. They also have a middle school version and another program, a branch off called Origins by Developmental Design. And so I was trained in that program. And, it starts off with a circle every morning, a check in. There's a really focus on developing that relationships between peers and the teacher and the student and creating that safe, courageous environment for students to be able to take risks with their learning and and it infuses the SEL with the curriculum. So it doesn't seem
Mm.
separate. And I
Right.
think that
Okay.
that's where schools get lost sometimes is they're trying to just insert SEL here.
Okay.
We're like, now is the time for social emotional learning in our schedule, instead of thinking of it as something that is woven throughout the fabric of the school day.
That's a very good point. I imagine some schools have difficulty with that, but the schools that have nailed that are really seeing the benefit of that, right? You can't, it's not like, oh wow, okay, it's 10 o'clock, time for all these SEL components, and then
Yes.
switch it back off and then just switch back to just textbook mode. Okay, go ahead and work on page 73.
Yes, and the students are very attuned to that, and they know,
Yeah.
if the teacher is showing up in an authentic way or if the teacher is checking a box.
So I'd love to learn a little bit more about IVA High School. So what sets it apart from other high schools, and how does the school's mission and vision guide its approach to teaching and learning?
So, when we started the school, we modeled the mission and vision after our very successful middle school, which is also here in Long Beach. It's a
Hmm.
6, 7, and 8 school. So they started 3 years before we did. So we took their mission and vision, which is fostering intellectual virtues in a thoughtful, challenging, and supportive academic environment. And what that means is really looking at how we can help students when they're in the learning process and maybe they feel a little stuck or if something feels a
Hmm.
little difficult, and being able to recognize that and then having these 9 intellectual virtues to help them move through that in a way that helps them engage with the learning, make connections, and move forward. So, for example, something like curiosity. When we
Okay.
feel stuck in a
Hmm.
particular area of learning, maybe we ask a question, right? Or maybe we're open-minded to somebody else's perspective. Or maybe we just need to like push through and show that tenacity. Or
Right.
maybe we need to be more attentive and read through and pay more attention. Or maybe we need to go deeper, right? And find out another way. And so these intellectual moves help students and teachers and actually anyone move through those sticking points in learning to help them re-engage in a way that's going to help connect those neurons and synapses in a way that helps them move through that. And when they move
Got
through
it.
that learning, when they engage in that struggle, that's when the magic happens, right? That's when students
Mm,
get those aha moments. And just by asking a question might not work for everybody. So we're able to
right.
have students say, maybe take a risk this time. And maybe taking a risk is asking a question. But we were able to, students are able to say, like, I showed courage there. Like that
Right.
was difficult for me to speak up. And I showed courage, and now
Right.
like I got it. Or I listened to somebody else's perspective. I showed open-mindedness, and now I see it in a different way. So that's what the intellectual virtues model of education is. What happened with our school is we have these great words on the wall, and we understand it. And the students
Right.
showed up and they were like, "Who are you? And why do we need to trust you? And like, what
Okay.
are these words?" Right?
Right.
So what we did is really activate that student voice and choice. So what that means is we said, what does this mean to you? And how would you put this in your own words, right? And then what needs to happen in our culture for you to be able to access these intellectual virtues, right? So I
Mm,
can't ask the student to just show up in a classroom and be courageous if they don't
right.
trust that that's a place that they can be safe.
Right.
So, what needs to happen in our school culture? So, students, what we did is we had a big community meeting and had that discussion. And I said, like, I know that these fancy words on the wall might not mean anything to you. So,
Right.
what do we need to do to help you activate those words and incorporate them into your life?
Okay.
So, yeah. So, what we did was we originally just started with having students um, develop their goals. What do you want from from learning? What do you want from our school? What can we do to help you? What's your goal? And then each student wrote those down and shared them in small groups. And then by hearing each other's goals, we were able to narrow that down to 3 to 5 goals from that group. And
Oh,
then
I love
a
that.
representative from each of those advisories met with me and then shared that out. And then we narrowed
Okay.
it down to 3 to 5 more as a school. And then we discussed, like, does this sound right? You said speak your truth, but what does that mean? And so they said,
Mhm.
well, we need to be respectful. I'm like, okay, speak your truth respectfully. You said pay attention. They're like, yeah, we want to use the word focus. I'm like, okay. So we were able to use their language. They
I
said
love that.
challenge for change. They
Yeah.
said motivate to elevate. So these were
Okay.
their words.
Right.
And yeah.
I love
And
so.
so
And do those words like do they change every year? Because when you get new students, you'll do the same exercise again.
yeah, so we had made posters, all the kids signed it, and they agreed to these school agreements, is what we call them. And
Okay.
then, yeah, every year we show them to the students and we said, this is what we did last year. Let's go back to your goals for this year and then see if they still fit. And every year we might have a little bit of a tweak, like
Yeah.
yeah, this year they said we don't want focus, we want speak, think, act mindfully. And we were like,
Okay.
okay. So then when we put them on the wall, they know that that's their voice,
Yeah.
right? So then we get the buy-in. And then we're able to say, hey, when you were on your cell phone, which one of these agreements wasn't followed? And then they'll say,
Mm,
I wasn't thinking and acting mindfully. I'm like, thank
mm,
you. Okay, so let's go back to your goal. Is that helping you?
right.
Because I want to support you with that. Right. So then you get the buy-in there of the culture. And it's
Right.
not us against them, but it's, oh, we're doing this together and they're actually here to support us. So that's what we're going for.
Wow, I love that. So would you say that was one of the most important decisions that you made during the founding process of this school? Was it the culture that the students had to be bought in? They needed to feel like they were a stakeholder and they had their own say in this?
Absolutely. That was the most important thing. And creating that sense of belonging and the contribution. So we keep coming back to that. Like, is this a place where our students feel that sense of belonging, where they can be
Mm,
themselves, where their voice is heard, where they're known, and where they can contribute, right? So they can walk around campus and say, like, I did that, or
right.
oh, that the policy on dress code, like I
Right.
had a role in affecting that policy because I didn't like the way that it was written, and I went to Miss Sanders and we had a discussion, and we shared it out to the school, and now we adjusted that policy to really make sense for us, and now we don't have as many dress code issues, right? So
Okay. Right.
um it's not it could because you want to avoid the against them. And I tell
Right.
students this all the time, like you got to know who your enemies are and who your allies are. And we're not your enemies, like we're really trying to be
Right.
your ally, but
Yeah.
how can we partner in that process? And they and
Mm.
they get that.
They get, yeah. I kind of want to flip the script now and talk, since we're talking about students, I would like to talk about teachers, right? So the
Mhm.
staff members over here. So obviously, I think in the teaching profession, we see a lot of teachers being burnt out. There are so many factors of teachers being burnt out, but I would love to focus on, I see a lot of the issues that stems from a bad school culture. So, since we're talking about school culture for kids, I'd love to learn a little bit more about your internal culture for your staff. What methods or what do you do at your school to make sure that the staff is also happy and they really enjoy working at the high school and they feel like they're also a stakeholder at the place?
That's a very underestimated, very important thing about a school culture because, the students are looking to see what the staff is doing, if they're happy, if they show up with a smile, if they're doing what they're passionate about, because
Right,
that is modeling for the students about how to be, right? And so that's the most important thing. And that's my role, right? Is to making sure my staff is happy, listened to, cared for. It's very similar to how we approach students. So the staff voice is also extremely important in the process of how we run the school.
right,
Um, and they have that partnership with me. And hopefully knowing that their voice is important and an important part of the process. And so I'm very transparent in my leadership. And, we have weekly meetings where I sit down, I'm like, this is what we're going through, or this is an issue. I want to propose it to you guys. What are some suggestions? And, ultimately, like, there's times when I need to make a decision, so I'm the
right,
leader, I'm the education
right,
leader.
right.
And they need that, so I don't always leave everything up to consensus, But it
Right.
is important to be able to have a place where teachers can come if they disagree with something and be able to talk that through. So their voice being heard is really important. That collaborative leadership is really important. And back to that sense of belonging and contribution, with teachers. We also have fun. I think that that's also a really important part.
Yeah.
Right? Again, another very underestimated. Like we went to an escape room, which is like we were
Okay.
like, do we
Yeah.
want to be locked in a room together? But
Yeah.
no, we had a great time. Or
Okay.
or we just like I just played Whitney Houston the other day in the office and we were all singing. So there's just times to like take breaks and have
Yeah.
fun and be playful and have fun with the students too. And then, when we're all singing Whitney Houston in the office, the students come by and they start laughing and
Yeah.
and then they join in and then we're like arm in arm singing. And so like it's good to just have those times where it doesn't need to be so serious. Like let's have
Right.
some fun. Learning should be
Right.
fun. And even in
Right.
those times in the office where it gets tense, like let's take a singing break. Like let's like dance it out.
Right.
So I think that like showing up every morning with a smile and saying good morning to everybody, making eye contact, and making sure everybody feels like they're an important part of what we're doing here.
No, I love that. Now, you're trained in progressive modalities to engage learners and provide equitable learning opportunities. So, how I kind of want to learn a little bit more about how do you ensure that all students have equitable access, and what does a holistic approach to education mean for students?
So, as a therapist and counselor, I definitely bring that to my role as an administrator and working with my counseling team. We know that in order for students to access curriculum, their basic needs need to be met, right? So,
Hmm.
what we did was we developed a rubric. This is one of the great things that came out of us actually doing distance learning because we needed to know how our students were doing and we knew this student isn't showing up but like this student's showing up but not turning their camera on, right? So we
Hmm.
wanted to keep tabs on all of our students, so we developed a rubric to really think about all of those different needs that students have and making sure that they have access to those needs. Um, so access to resources to address those needs. So our rubric looks at things like, are they a free and reduced lunch student? Like, are they low
Right.
income? Do they get breakfast in the morning? Are they eating lunch? So it's looking at basic stuff. It's also, we have a space in there for social emotional learning. So anything that we hear about their social or emotional life in general, like are they seeing a counselor? Do we think they need a
Right.
counselor? Have they checked in? We also, of course, look at academics and grades, but that only tells us such a small part of how
Yeah.
they're doing.
Yeah.
And so what we do as a team is we do that's the holistic approach. Is we literally sit down at a table. I have the attendance, the counselor, I have the dual enrollment support person who helps with them going to college, and we do dual
Okay.
enrollment classes here. So that's another part. Are they getting access to the resources at the college level too? And we all sit down. I'm missing somebody. Attendance, food, a counselor, um, oh, and outreach. And so just the people that know the families really well, and we sit down and we talk through each of the students, and we're like, okay, how are they doing? What do you know?
Mm.
And we literally like do a rubric, and we
Yeah.
see what needs do they have. Do they have internet at home, right? Are they showing
Right.
up with their computer? So making sure that they have those needs met as well. And providing every student with a computer. I know like that was another thing that we decided at the very beginning when we founded the school was just like leveling the playing field and making sure that every student has access to a computer. So you
Yeah.
don't have one student showing up with a super fancy laptop and another student that's just on their phone, right?
Right.
So we level the playing field there. Everybody has access to internet. Everybody has a charger when they start the year. And then even if they forget it, they're able to check one out at the front office.
Mm.
They give us some collateral. They give us their phone or something, so they make sure that they give it back. Um, but they everybody has access, and we also use Go Guardian to make sure we monitor what they're doing
Okay.
on the computer in
Right.
the classroom, and I get alerts if there's anything that they search that's that I need to know about. So it helps us just kind of keep tabs on them and just make sure that they're all on track for what they they have everything that they need in order to be successful.
Yeah, it's the pandemic has really taught us a lot, or at least I've learned a lot coming out of the or even in the pandemic early days. I was not aware of just how many students or how many families did not have access to internet. And
Hmm.
I'm not talking about United States, because I'm talking about just my backyard here, New York City. When I think of New York City, I think of it as highly accessible. I think that there's hotspots everywhere and that everyone has internet. And in reality, there's so many families without internet. So many families. I was really shocked. Um, it's it's really it was it was a really a great learning moment from us, that you have no idea what some of your students, what kind of resources they have access to. And so it changed a lot of our internal thought process and how we do things as well. um, but I mean, yeah, I wanted to mention that. But talking about technology, talking about internet, have your students come across ChatGPT yet? Has that been a buzzword over here in your school yet?
It's slowly leaking it through. Yes. So, yes, I think it's slowly coming through. We've found a couple of papers turned in that we were like,
Okay. Yeah.
so we we're actually having that conversation. Also, teachers, right? So teachers are using it for curriculum
Yeah.
creation.
Yeah.
And so that's just also something that we're just starting to explore and talk about and see how it's a resource, and also
Right.
we don't want it to be a crutch. So like how to use it as a way to support and supplement what you're doing and not the only thing that you're doing. So yeah, that's a conversation that we're just beginning.
Yeah, I think a lot of schools are having conversations right now about this, and schools will ultimately have to decide what they're going to do with this,
Mhm.
whether or not they're going to allow it on some level. But I think it's here, and it's here to stay. And I think all
Mhm.
schools will eventually have to adapt into this new world and reality. And it's exactly as you said. We should be using it so it assists us and not puts us at a disadvantage. So it's a really cool time, at least I think so. But I know that it's a very
Mhm.
hot topic right now. I do want to talk very briefly about at IVA. I know that each student gets their own Chromebook for digital citizenship development. Can you please so quickly let me know what is that digital citizenship development?
So it's pretty similar to what we were just talking about. It's being able to really identify and use technology as a tool, and not. We know that students can use it as a toy, and
Right.
they all know how to look up YouTube and listen to music videos. I get alerts for that a lot. Or Wikipedia or something, right? They know how to do that, but can they use it to support their creativity? Can they use it
Okay.
to support their critical thinking? Can they use it as a tool for self-growth, right? So that's what we're constantly coming back to, is like, how is it developing their critical thinking, their creativity, and as a tool for self-growth? And that is more of a challenge, right? So that's the part where students are like, like, can't I just? And we're like, no. And honestly, sometimes we have to tell them to close their computers
Right.
and interact face to face. And that's that
Right.
part, right? Of using as a tool. Now is the time to use your computer, and now is the time
Right.
not to use your computer. And in that part, actually, I think some schools aren't teaching as much anymore. When you go into a classroom, you often see everybody's computer open. If you come to our classroom, there are times where you definitely will see that, but you will also see them sitting in a circle with hands free and looking at
Mm,
each other and having a
yeah.
conversation. And so I think as important it is to teach it as a tool, it's important to teach it when not to use technology and when to show empathy. And if we
Mm,
all have our computers like this, when somebody's in front of our face, when somebody's trying to just, share something that's meaningful to them, it creates a barrier, right? And
yeah.
so how can we help students know how to put those computers down or those phones
Right.
down,
Right.
and look into people's eyes, right? And be able to actually listen
Right.
attentively and respond in a way that's meaningful. And that's something that chat, chat
ChatGPT. Yeah.
thank you, isn't able to do yet
Yeah.
anyways.
Yeah.
Um, and that's the humanistic part that we need to keep tapping into with our students,
Right.
is how can we connect and continue to build those authentic relationships and meaningful relationships? And so that when we're looking at technology, yes, we can, that helps us, our intellect, that helps us with information, but how much is it going to help us really connect with our heart
Mm.
and then make an action that's meaningful?
Summer, I have two last questions for you, and one of the questions I was just thinking about is if you can give any advice, and I'm only asking this given your extensive experiences as counseling as well. What is one piece of advice that you would tell parents that have high school level students, uh, j- uh, just parents in general? What is one advice you can give to parents that their children in high school, something to do at home, or just something that you would like to share?
We had an event recently, and I started it off saying, "We're all here on purpose with a purpose." Right. And so, and then I opened it up to the audience and just said, "What's your purpose of being here?" And so you heard students saying things like, "Oh, to be seen." And I heard students say things like, "Oh, I'm a senior and this is my last time to connect, this event." Or parents to say, "To support my child." Right. So
Hmm.
I think like taking a step back and really thinking about what is my purpose, and it could be as small as what is my purpose in asking my child that question or what is my purpose as a parent, so maybe something a little broader, or and then doing that on purpose, right? So being intentional and paying
Hmm.
attention to those moves. And so when
Hmm.
your child comes home, it's like, okay, my purpose right now is to really connect with my child, and I'm going to do that in the best way I know how. And so
Right.
being mindful of that instead of when they walk in being like, your room's a mess,
Yeah.
or or like, why didn't you take
Yeah.
out the trash or something, right? Or why are you still on your phone, right? And
Yeah.
so really being intentional about, okay, I want to do this right now, and continuing to make that a goal. And sometimes with parents, because I'm a therapist, so I've done family therapy and working with families, and with parents in particular, sometimes they have like 10 things that they want to do, right? So that's sometimes how I start the session is like, what do you really want
Mm.
to focus on in being a parent? And they come up with 10, 20 list things. And I'm
Yeah.
like, okay, let's like focus on three. Let's just
Yeah.
like really narrow it down. What are the three things that you really want to work on as a parent so that you can be better and not bitter, right? So how can
Yeah.
you be a better parent when what are those things? And so and often they say things like, like, just connect with my child, something like that.
Hmm.
And it's like, okay, let's just focus on what that means and what does that look
Yeah.
like? What does that feel like? And then what are some ways that you can do that on a daily basis? So back to your original question, I think that it's really being in tune with what your purpose is in those small moments, and then also in the larger scale of what you want to, aim towards.
That is such great advice. Summer, I want to ask you one last question, which I love asking every guest that we have on, which is who has been the strongest or most inspiring person in your life, and what lessons have you learned from them?
Hmm. I would say it's hard for me to choose one over the other. So I would just, I'm going to cheat a little bit and say, because they're sort of a unit, is my parents.
Right.
I know it's kind of a cliche answer, but my dad and my mom have been my rock for sure throughout my life, and they balance each other so well. My mom, like I said, was a teacher, and so her push towards education and always learning, and continuing to grow and change. I think that's a very important part as an administrator, as a mom,
Yeah.
as a human, is always striving towards, learning and improving and reflecting. Um, and just knowing that, like having that sense of like, I can do it. My mom, she did a lot and she'd come home and be like, you could do this. Come on, let's go. So
Yeah.
just that sense of
Love that.
encouragement. And my dad, he's an artist, and he is constantly thinking of really cool projects. He's in his 70s now, but he's still like, I'm gonna do the stained glass door in front of the house. And so he just kind of showing me that you can continue to expand, and all wild ideas are okay. And then let's
Yeah.
figure out how to do it. It's all figure outable. Like we'll figure
Right.
it out. Let's just sit down, and if we think about it and we draw it out and we like talk about it, we'll be able to move through it and figure it out. And they both give 10-second hugs. So that's like
Wow.
another advice to parents.
Now that's a great advice. That's simple yet so many parents do not do that. I don't
Yeah,
even know what the
like, and, and if you don't start young, it's harder to do as they get older,
yeah.
so
I
but
I wonder what percent of parents hug their children. I mean, when they're young kids, they probably do it, but at some moment in time, they just stop and they never go back. And it's sad that you mentioned that. It's the parents find themselves, their children now are a high school teenager and they want to hug them, but the dynamic is it just feels so weird. So it's just hard to break that barrier again. Oh
yeah.
man, that is great advice. Summer, thank you so much for sharing that story. When I asked that, it's definitely not a cliche to say to say it's my parents. I loved hearing, listening to the story behind it. It's incredible. Summer, thank you so much for sharing your time and insights with us today. I love your valuable insights. Your unwavering commitment to education and creating a nurturing and thoughtful learning environment is truly remarkable. And I look forward to your continued success at your high school.
Thank you so much. It was such a pleasure to be here. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.